Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today we're taking a completely data-driven look at a topic that honestly usually gets lost in wild theories and endless debates. We're talking about the Civil Stability Protocol for UAP exposure. We are totally setting aside the rumors here and focusing strictly on the science of human behavior. Consider this your executive briefing on how human civilization can actually handle persistent contact. Let's dive right in.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. 1. The real UAP problem. 2. The THD framework. 3. The phases of contact. 4. Measuring stress. 5. Testing and falsification. And 6. Real-world impact. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get moving.
Section 1. The real UAP problem. We're completely flipping the script today on how the world usually talks about unidentified anomalous phenomena. You know, everyone usually jumps straight to origins and military threats. But I want to start you off with a provocative thought. What if the biggest threat from UAPs isn't an attack, but our own reaction? Like, what happens if society's belief systems literally break down just from the pressure of seeing something we don't understand every single day? What if the real danger isn't some sci-fi laser attack, but simply our own panic and inability to handle the unknown? This really brilliant insight comes directly from research by Kevin L. Brown. He's a researcher, inventor, and author who realized that modern UAP discourse is making a massive category error. See, we keep treating this as a pure engineering or defense problem when it's actually a human behavioral problem. We're so obsessed over the objects up in the sky that we're totally ignoring the millions of people down on the ground who are just trying to make sense of them. So the wrong question, which is the one pretty much everyone asks, is what are they? That focuses entirely on origins and technology. But the right question, the one that actually matters for our civilizational stability, is how do we react? Honestly, before we can ever figure out what these things are, we absolutely have to ensure our society doesn't just collapse from the confusion of not knowing. Section 2. THD Framework. Which brings us to the operational solution. How do we actually prepare for a reality where the unknown is just a daily occurrence? Well, the answer is Triune Harmonic Dynamics, or THD. This is a scientific model measuring how human society behaves and adapts when we're repeatedly exposed to stable, non-hostile anomalies over a long period. This is not about UFO speculation, right? It's a serious, analytical model tracking our behavioral coherence. It essentially asks, if a persistent, non-hostile anomaly simply exists in our skies day after day, how much pressure does that put on us, and how do we adapt without tearing ourselves apart? To put this in terms that are super easy to grasp, think about a historical analogy like human interaction with unfamiliar wildlife. Imagine you're walking in the woods and run into an animal you've never seen before. A lot of the time, that animal isn't attacking at all. It's literally just standing there. But the human observer panics, misreads the situation, and completely creates the danger themselves. In the THD framework, the instability comes from the observer, which is us, misreading the signals, not the observed anomaly. We're the ones causing the chaos. Section 3. Phases of contact. Let's look at how this psychological pressure actually builds up over time, because it definitely doesn't happen all at once. The THD model breaks civilizational exposure down into 3 very distinct progressive steps. Step 1 is the base phase, Step 2 is the pressure phase, and Step 3 is the integration phase. So breaking these down, during the base phase, events are rare and easily ignored by society. Think about, the last few decades. But as sightings become more undeniable, we move right into the pressure phase. Sightings are frequent, they're public, and they put heavy stress on our belief systems. Finally, we hit the integration phase. The anomalies simply can't be ignored anymore, and society is forced to adapt, create rules, or frankly risk breaking apart entirely. Section 4. Measuring stress. Now, how do we actually measure this building pressure in a scientific way? We definitely can't just guess. We need hard variables that cause structural pressure. We're talking about things like how often anomalies appear, public visibility rates, and major delays in government response. Then you add in wild public speculation and the degradation of reliable witnesses. All of these factors interact and multiply against each other, basically pushing our civilizational stability closer and closer to the breaking point. And when you look at the structural pressure index contributors, there's a really surprising takeaway. Observation frequency, the actual sightings themselves, only accounts for about 30% of the total pressure. The rest of it, 30% comes from institutional silence, and a massive 40% comes from interpretive panic and speculation. So the real danger isn't actually up in the sky. It's the silence from our institutions and the wild speculation running rampant. Section 5. Testing and falsification.
Because any strong analytical framework has to be testable, right? Science just isn't science unless it can be proven wrong. So the THD hypothesis is actually false under a few specific conditions. First, if UAPs just remain isolated and rare forever. Second, if physical aggression actually becomes the primary threat, like an alien invasion movie. Third, if unmanaged public panic somehow works out better than having structured rules. And lastly, if high anomaly pressure causes absolute zero societal transition. If society just shrugs off daily sightings without needing new rules, then the THD model is simply false.
But if the model holds true, we are going to hit what's called the threshold condition. This is basically a mathematical breaking point. When the total structural pressure exceeds a critical limit, society simply cannot remain in a state of ambiguity. We can't just sit around arguing on social media forever. We will be forced to transition and completely reorganize our behavior to survive the new normal.
Section 6. Real-world impact. Let's bring this all together and talk about what this actually means for institutions right now. The policy impacts of THD are massive. First, we need to standardize non-escalatory observation. That basically means learning how to just observe without accidentally attacking. We also absolutely must prevent premature ideological closure, stopping people from immediately jumping to extreme conclusions. And finally, we have to stabilize media handling to actually reduce the panic. There is a quote from the research that is absolutely vital. It goes, "Civil systems do not need shared ontology to require shared procedure. Procedure emerges before agreement." If you take one thing away from this explainer today, let it be that. In plain English, we don't have to agree on what these anomalies actually are. We just have to agree on how to safely behave when we see them. The procedure has to emerge way before the agreement does. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. We spend all this energy looking up, desperately trying to decode the unknown. But surviving contact might not be an engineering challenge at all. It might just be a test of our own psychological endurance. So before we find out who they are, can we figure out who we are? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Stay curious.